So hello. If you didn't hear me before, we're just gonna wait a few minutes for people to sign on and get comfy. I know there's some people that are coming from the keynote presentation. That was great. Um, yeah, so thank you for being here. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I will also be putting some links in there and introduce myself. If you guys need any technical assistance, feel free to directly message me. But like I said, welcome. We have some great people joining us today. Probably gonna give another minute. I know there's still people trying to find links, trying to register, coming from different presentations. Thank you for your patience. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and start. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the PeerTAC workshop, Supervision of Peer Specialists and Advocates in the LGBTQIA plus community, presented by Elise Diamond and Beth Bloom at the inaugural Supervision Summit. I am Angelique Rodriguez, and I will be the moderator for this session. Some housekeeping things. For technical support during the session, please text Stephen Nowotniak. Stephen, feel free to put your number or email in the chat, or you guys could chat to me directly during the workshop. Again, my name is Angelique. Your microphones will be muted and cameras will be off to eliminate any background noise or distractions. So when you join, feel free to mute yourselves. We encourage everybody to use the chat box to introduce yourself, like I said, and to ask any questions or have any comments. We always encourage conversation. Choose everyone in the chat box for your comments to be visible to all attendees, and choose host and panelists to ask questions to the moderator or the presenters. Just a reminder, the session is being recorded, and a link to the recording and the slides or any resources associated with the session will be posted on the PeerTAC website within the next 30 days. I will also be posting a link in the chat to the PeerTAC website. Let's see what else. If you lose internet connection or accidentally leave the Zoom room, choose the link next to the title of the workshop in the program that you guys have received for the Supervision Summit. And if you are seeking CE credit, you cannot use a phone link. 10 minutes are reserved at the end to ask any questions, and you will receive instructions by email for completing the workshop evaluation and earning CE credits for your participation from the Alliance. And finally, with that, PeerTAC would like to thank Elise and Beth and everybody who worked to make this happen. There's been a lot of moving parts. And to learn more about them, to see their bios, feel free to visit the Supervision Summit website, or actually the page on the PeerTAC website. And now please join me in welcoming Elise Diamond and Beth Bloom. So thank you very much.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. For me, I'm Beth. I use the she, they pronouns. And it's nice to see a few friendly faces.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Elise. Hey, them. It's fantastic to see some folks that I know. So I'm stoked that y'all are here and including some folks who have at least as much expertise on this topic as I do. So like feel free to to add your thoughts. Um, yeah, it's really pretty rad that we get to be here and talk about this stuff. Um, all right, so shall I start with the slideshow? Is that cool? Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I'm getting a nod. Sweet. Okay, cool. All right, slides. Yay. So we'll start with telling you a little bit more about like who we are, so that you know why we think we're worth listening to. Um, so I'm Elise. I've worked for a bunch of years doing like LGBTQIA plus cultural responsiveness training and consulting for mostly for like smaller community nonprofit mental health providers. And I've been a peer specialist for close to 8 years now, I think. Um, and
Yeah,
currently,
well,
my, my
got to
main,
find in man.
oh,
You
hi.
said,
Thanks. Currently, my primary employer is the Center for Practice Innovations, where I am a peer specialist trainer with the OnTrack New York program. Um, I'm a non-binary queer trans person, um, also autistic and mad, and a psychiatric abolitionist. And what else is relevant? And I am kind of in queer and trans community and have been for a long time. And so when I talk about my experiences and the things that I think about what it's like to be a trans and queer peer specialist and to work and to like have navigated systems with those identities, I'm talking about my experiences, but also those of my friends and my family. And that's it. Thanks. Beth, tell us about you.
Thanks, Elise. My name is Beth Blum. As I said earlier, I use the she, they pronouns. I've been a peer at East House for about 10 years now. And the last however many years, I have worked in the core program. So that's, if you're not familiar with it, it's very much one-on-one meeting people where they're at. I do quite a lot of training on LGBTQ topics, including coming up at the Helio Health Conference in Syracuse at the beginning of next month. And I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you. So these are oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, we can't skip Marcia, right?
No.
And I actually forgot to mention I'm supposed to say that I am not here as a representative of the Center for Practice Innovations, but as a private whatever. Okay. Um, all right, so I want to just acknowledge Marsha P. Johnson and these two things that she said that I think are really relevant, right? Because like one of the things we're going to talk about are some of the things that make life difficult for queer and trans people, for LGBTQIA plus people. And I don't want to like make the mistake of acting like we're or of like focusing over much on us as like this vulnerable community because like there is that is a real part of the story, but also we're like we're an amazing powerful community doing really beautiful important things, practicing liberation and freedom in ways that are magical and important and that folks that are not part of our communities can learn a lot from. And so I really want the focus to be not so much on how we're vulnerable as on the fact that we like all have real power to change things, to make things better together. And that benefits all of us, everybody. And I think Marcia was speaking to that when she talked about how history is like what's happening right now. It's the choices that we're making right now, every day. Even when we don't realize that we're making choices. Also, I love that quote, "I may be crazy, but that don't make me wrong." A lot of people know of Marsha P. Johnson as an activist and a community leader and a lot of things, but aren't necessarily aware that she was also psychiatrically labeled and hospitalized a bunch of times. And that Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which was a movement that she co-founded, was a really great example of peer support before we really used the words peer support very much, like in the late 60s. And so yeah, we just need to acknowledge that. Thanks.
Thanks, Elise. If you don't know about Marsha P. Johnson, I strongly recommend you go to Google as soon as we're finished and check her out. She was one of the mothers of the movement. So our objectives today are here. They're in front of you. I don't feel like I need to read them to you. I think you can all read them. I'd rather have time for us to present and then for you to be able to ask questions. So that being as it may, let's go to the next slide, Elise. So this is our agenda. We have it broken up into 3 sections: best practices for employers, specific challenges that the queer and trans community face, and queer liberation versus mental health recovery. So this first part we're going to talk about is basically if you are supervising peers, I'm glad you're here. Secondly, if you're supervising LGBTQIA plus peers or are one yourself, I think there's a lot of things that are important to discuss, you know, the work environment, the space, organizational policies, and then, you know, your practices as the supervisor.
All right, so we'll start with just a little bit of like data about why we need to specifically address our communities, right? So this is from the US Trans Survey, which is if you want to learn about trans people and look at quality research about trans people, it is the best source for that. This is the 2015 one. The 2022 Trans Survey is not, all the data isn't out yet, but it will be really soon. And it's just showing a lot of people experience some really not okay stuff at the workplace. Similarly, a lot of trans folks, like, we deal with a lot of threat and danger. And so here are some of the things that some of us have done to protect ourselves in the workplace. Obviously, if you are supervising somebody, you don't want them to have to deal with all of this stuff, right? I probably don't need to convince anybody of that, but in case I do, here's some data, which I hope you find convincing. Nobody should have to like hide who they are, right? Obviously. And particularly in the world of peer support, like the whole point is who we are, right? And the things that we've experienced and what we've learned from that, the wisdom we've gained, the ways that we can support other people because of who we are. And so especially in peer roles, like we do not want people feeling like they have to shrink away to nothing and disappear or like keep themselves secret, right?
So I just want to go through a few things that you may or may not have encountered or thought of. Do you have gender neutral bathrooms in your place of employment? Do you have a place where people who identify perhaps as trans or non-binary, want or feel comfortable using. If not, I think it's really important to assess that and discuss that with your management team. We want people to feel comfortable enough, obviously, whether, with themselves to be able to use the restroom. Do you have, a visible support? And visible, I mean, we're talking here like pride flags and non-discrimination policies and inclusive materials on your marketing materials, things like the progressive pride flag or something, so that when somebody quickly looks at it, they can see and they can look at your organization as one who is open. The other thing is, does your electronic medical records, does it have a place for the person's preferred name and preferred pronoun? If you don't have your pronouns on your email address, I strongly suggest you add them. It helps. It helps people to be able to feel comfortable and be able to trust you. And we're talking here, prioritize accessibility. We all come in different shapes and sizes and abilities. And, adding a queer component on top of it will sometimes make, the people in your who are working with you uncomfortable. Again, marketing and decor that shows actual human diversity. The other thing that both Elise and I thought was important to discuss was that people you work with are going to either, and you don't know who obviously, but they may come out or they may transition. And as their supervisor, you want to be supportive of that, and you want to make sure that your HR department is also going to support the person. Thanks, Elise.
Mhm. Great.
So again, I'm sorry, Elise, go on.
Yeah. So just some examples, right? Of ADA compatible bathroom signs that don't make weird assumptions about like trans people maybe being aliens or anything like that. They're just clear and to the point. Like, this is what this room is. This is what's inside this room. This room is or is not wheelchair accessible. And a clear non-discrimination policy that actually says gender identity. This is from a therapy clinic in Idaho, but it was just an easy one to find on the internet. And I can just tell, oh, I see a hand. Cool. I love when there's a hand. Go ahead, David.
So do you feel like the signs that have like mermaids and centaurs or whatever are othering folks? Because I kind of feel like we're magical. So I like that representation.
Yeah. I mean, there are different opinions. People feel differently, and I feel differently on different days. So yeah, I think if the question is best practices, probably best for, especially for like a service provider, then my personal preference is definitely like say what's in the bathroom and don't make judgments about like whether I'm human or not. In other places, sometimes I find those signs cool and fun, and sometimes I don't. But yeah, the
Okay.
point, yeah. Also, those signs generally are not as likely to be ADA compatible as as signs that are just sort of saying what's in the room. But that's my opinion. You're allowed to have a different one. And I will just say, like, when I walk into a provider's office and if I look around and I don't see a rainbow or like a non-discriminate, if I don't like see this stuff, then like my assumption is like it's not safe for me to be honest about who I am here. And I'm probably gonna lie and I'm probably gonna leave as soon as I can. And I'm probably gonna be thinking a lot more about like trying to present in a more binary way so that I feel safe than I am going to be about like doing what I came there for. And that's my experience. And a lot of my friends say the same things.
Additionally, you have a question about the bathrooms in the chat.
Oh, thank you. What's
Yeah,
the
I know somebody asked, when you mention bathrooms, are you speaking of making a single stall bathroom gender neutral, or if there are more than one stalls in a bathroom, anyone is allowed to come in?
Personally, I feel like we're grown-ups, and you know, uh, if it's just a kind of anybody can use this restroom or a single stall, some people feel more comfortable with that. So we want to be sure that people have options is really what it is. Um,
Yeah, I don't think there's any good reason not to make every single stall bathroom gender neutral, period. Um,
Yeah.
and of course, in New York State, people have the legal right to use whichever bathroom they decide is the correct one for them. So, a lot of folks work in places where you don't have control over the building and you can't necessarily make there be single stall bathrooms. And maybe your agency is renting and whoever owns the building like decides what the signage is. But you can print out a piece of paper that, maybe mentions the Gender Express and Non-Discrimination Act and makes it really clear that people can use whatever bathroom they say is the right one, and tape it to the bathroom door if you don't own it and you can't change the sign.
Yeah.
just want to take a second to respond to Krista. She talks about the electronic health records, and that according to the insurance and how we have to bill for services, they always ask for the gender. And of course, when someone transitions and perhaps they describe themselves as non-binary, there's not an option for that. And so there's all sorts of things that, Krista, if we could change it, I think it would make the, it would make the world so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, and trans people, like we know that legal gender is a thing. Like we're aware of this. Um, and there's definitely something to be said for providers understanding that too and being able to like ask reasonable questions. And actually we're getting into organizational policies, so perfect.
Okay.
Speaking of forms and data collection, right? Yeah. Oh, David, yes, go ahead.
Before you move on,
Mhm.
so I'm in charge of doing the training for my agency,
Mhm.
and I always get some interesting answers because we have all gender bathrooms and they're multi-stalled.
Mhm.
We hold groups there that are from providers that are outside of the agency. We get some interesting interactions that I have to witness. Do you have any best practices? I guess.
So, David, when you say interaction, I mean people are not comfortable using an all-gender bathroom?
Yes, they're very confined to the binary thinking, and generally my ideology is we're all going in there to pee or do something else. We should be minding our business anyways. Go do what you got to do and wash your hands and get out.
Well, that would be perfect if we could say that. Perhaps when people come in, to the groups and whatever, you just at the very beginning say, just so you know, we have all gender bathrooms here, and you're going in there to pee and wash your hands and get out. So something like that might work. Also,
Well,
maybe a sign on the bathroom.
the bathrooms have signs, and they these are not people that are going there for the first time. These are people that have already been there and encountered the information. They're just being resistant.
I think education, education, education.
Well, unfortunately, as the trainer, I had to go fall back onto the law and say New York state law says that
Mhm.
anyone can use this bathroom regardless of their gender identity, or how they present. So I'm going to stick by the law. So I was hoping there was a better way to do that or a softer way to do that, but apparently there is not.
Not that I'm aware of. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, same. There may be somebody who has an idea about that, but it's not me. All right, yeah. So organizational policies, which like just because you're a supervisor doesn't necessarily mean that you're like a supervisor at a level where you can just make a decree and change organizational policy, right? So sometimes we need you to do advocacy. Um, so one of the ones we were starting to talk about like forms and data collection, and I just always say like if you are asking for a data point, make sure there's a reason that you're asking for it. There are a lot of forms that include questions and the information just goes into a database and is never actually needed. So that's the first thing. It's just like don't ask for data that isn't actually needed for real. Um, know where it's kept, know who has access. Like have security. If you're going to store people's personal data, like actually take security seriously. Um, and if you're asking for somebody's like legal gender as it appears on, for example, their social security account or their health insurance or on their driver's license, then say that that's what you're asking for, right? And if you're asking for someone's legal name, it's called a legal name. It's not their real name. It's not their birth name. It's their legal name. My legal name, for example, is not my birth name. It's also not Elise. And you know, we live in this world. We know that our legal names are required sometimes. So if that's what you need, it's okay to ask for it. Um, and as a supervisor, if you know someone's dead name, which is the name that a trans person used before they used their current chosen name, um, no, you don't. That knowledge should die with you. It's not okay to share it with anybody, casually or any other time. If you're referring to someone in the past, before they transitioned, you still use their current name and pronouns. That all clear? I can't actually see any of you, so I'm gonna assume you're nodding. Um, some other policy stuff. Every staff person should be trained. Every single staff person, including HR, including janitors, including everybody, and board members. And this will soon actually be required. The New York State Department of Labor just released a report on trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary employees, wherein they recommended making mandatory gender training for all New York State employers. Gender is the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. So, and it looks like Governor Hochul was on board with implementing the recommendations of this report. So within a short period of time, every employer is going to have to do mandatory gender training, just like sexual harassment training anyway. So you might as well get on it and make sure that you're hiring like actual LGBTQ people to do your training. Um, and okay, so you probably have a dress code. Just make sure that professional appearance is not code for like white, gender conforming, all that stuff. Um, and understand like it's okay to have rules and it's okay to have dress codes. Just make sure that you're not like embodying gender stereotypes and oppression with them, right? Um, I work remotely, and being a trans person and also an autistic person, it's real nice to like not have to worry about all the nonsense that I have to worry about working in person. So I just recommend if remote work is a possibility, even if it's just for like half a day once every couple of weeks, like consider it. It really does reduce stress, when it's appropriate, obviously. Um, yeah, just put your pronouns in your email signature and on your Zoom name. You can right click your little image on Zoom right now and add your pronouns. Super easy, so simple. Hardly any effort, and it makes things just better for everybody. And if you are working in a place where there are enough employees to support it, affinity groups are great. Affinity groups are just like a time that's during work hours when people who belong to any oppressed group get to like talk to each other. They can make a really big difference for people who are like dealing with stuff that's not working for them, being able to talk about it and then communicate it to supervisors and management and actually get things changed and make things better rather than just leaving, which is generally what we do when we don't feel respected in our workplaces, right?
So, as a supervisor, I think we're all aware of important practices and, that supervision needs to be collaborative. It's, none of us want to, we want to work together to help the people we're supervising to be to feel more comfortable and be more successful. And if you're working with LGBTQ people, understand that that might have some impact on how they're feeling. We want to practice consent, and we don't want to gaslight somebody or be discriminative. I think that would, hopefully nobody would do that, but no, surprisingly, it still happens. And also, recognize the stereotypes you have. We all grow up, in this world, and you may have grown up being aware of gay people. I wasn't until pretty much I was in college. I know, living in the burbs and a lot of white people, that's just how it was for me. But if you come, people come from different backgrounds, and maybe a religious background or, maybe a family background that, made you, you learn the idea that, maybe queer people are not good people. So, acknowledge that. And ask questions. It's okay. I think it's really important, actually. If you don't know something, we may not have every answer that you're looking for, but our job as people who are being supervised, in other words, your LGBTQ peer, it's not our job to educate you on queer issues. That's your responsibility. So this one, treat us as colleagues and not clients. My first supervisor thought that I was in some way her client, and we just bumped heads all the time. I was like, that's not what this is about. This is not how it has to be. And it was sad because, it was not productive. And, be aware of your body language, especially, how are you sitting? Are you sitting too close? Are you sitting too far away? If your arms crossed in front over your chest, all of those things kind of, I think you should be aware of in general, but, we want to be mindful of those things. Okay, you're next, Elise.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some specific challenges, specific issues that are like important to talk about, I guess. But before we do that, a thing that I forgot to mention in relation to getting your staff all trained, is so I got into doing this kind of training by, of course, being the only trans person basically in every space that I was in for a little while. Well, every work-related space, I should say. And so it was sort of like, oh, like train us and we'll continue to pay you, $14 an hour to train us. And just like, don't don't do that. Don't make the one queer or trans person in your agency train everybody. If they want to, if they're into it, if they're going to be supported, and if you're going to pay them for the additional work, sure. Understand that trainers generally make like several $100s an hour when we're like called in as consultants and outside trainers. So, you know, if you're paying your peer specialists like minimum wage, and then asking them to do this totally, I mean, you shouldn't be paying a peer specialist minimum wage. I realize that that's often not something that you necessarily have direct control over, but that's another conversation. But just understand, like, it's a different kind of work, and don't exploit us, please. Thank you. All right. So Beth, tell us about having a trauma orientation in supervision.
Thank you. Obviously, most all of the people that we work with as peers have some sort of trauma background. But you know, the queer and trans community has a background, but has certain things that have happened to them or could have happened to them, such as, you know, coming out of the closet. You think, oh, well, you know, it's like, it just never ends. Every time you go see a new doctor, or if, you know, that somebody moves in next door, or, you know, maybe you're involved in education and you're going from classes to classes, it just, you're constant, it's a constant need to, you know, come out. It just doesn't really end. And it does change the longer you've been out, but it can, for some people, particularly early on, it can be a really big trauma. Institutional or historical trauma, you know, think of religions across the board who are and continue to be very, very anti anything but pretty much, you know, cisgender straight people in those kind of relationships. And for centuries, women were burned at the stake because they were, you know, they were thought to be witches. Quite often they were lesbians. Education, if you go to, say, a religious-based college and you come out somewhere along the way, or you go into it that way, it can be really traumatic when you hear day after day after day how terrible queer people are. I think we're all aware of the political climate right at this time. I don't need to think I need to go into it, but there we go. Healthcare, lack of health insurance, because it's, you know, for everybody, but doctors who won't treat queer people, pharmacists who won't fill prescriptions because of religious beliefs. And of course, you know, we're all aware of Roe v. Wade being overturned last year and the lack of safe abortions in many parts of the country. Trans individuals have, you know, experienced trauma on a different level. And it could be family, it could be friends that you just don't know. Intersex individuals, these are people who may have or have been born with genitalia that may not be what one would expect when you look at a girl or at a boy early on in their lives. And family rejection, you know, so many of the homeless young people in the world are queer or trans, and, you know, their family has sent them all out. You know, we don't want you anymore. How horrible is that? Community violence. I'm sure many of you remember the Pulse nightclub attack. That was traumatic to anybody, I would imagine, who has any compassion. But to the queer and trans community, it was a community trauma that, people are still dealing with. And having that constant fear of coming out. Yes, Angelique, that's true. You just never know when you have to come out to somebody or what's going to happen. And then just the daily vulnerabilities. Do hold hands with your spouse or your partner or your, whatever. How do you dress? And, bullying in school is, just over the top. I mean, that young person in Oklahoma, I think Nick's, I can't think of their last name, committed suicide after a fight in school. So, our kids in particular, our young people, are so vulnerable and they just don't have the skills and ability to manage. So, you're up. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff happening in the chat too. So if you're not in there, I encourage you to get in there. So we are going to talk a little about the political and legislative environment right now, or at least very recently. It's changing all the time. Yeah, so you may follow this. I don't know if y'all do. I do for sure. A lot of my friends do because it's about us. There are a lot of attempts to legislate us out of existence, to make it impossible for us to exist in public, especially focused on controlling children. Specifically bills that are specifically about targeting trans people. There are lots. Also, sometimes they get overturned because lawsuits happen, and a lot of the time they're totally unconstitutional. Nonetheless, there's a real connection that is quite easy to trace between laws that restrict and try to control and try to eliminate trans people from public life and subsequent waves of violence against trans people in the places where those laws get passed. And that may or may not be something that's on your radar. For me, it's very much on my radar all the time, every day. Yeah, it's not really something that I am ever not thinking about a little bit. And just to put a little bit of perspective, right? How much that has increased in recent times. And we're kind of on track to have a similar year to 2023 right now. Lord, they didn't have any data on translegislation.com when I pulled this chart, but just that it has changed. There's a real jump right now, which is scary. So before I was working as a peer specialist trainer, which I've only been doing for about 7 months now. I was working as a peer specialist, primarily working with young people, late teens, early 20s. And a few of the folks I was supporting were trans, and every one of them were also thinking about this current situation. And not just these efforts to legislate us out of existence, but also all the stories that are being told about us in media. And particularly, so I live in Kingston, which is a little blue shape. This is a map of how townships throughout New York State voted in the 2020 election. So the darker red, the more overwhelmingly they voted for Trump. The darker blue, the more overwhelmingly they voted for Biden. And sometimes we forget that because it's easy to think New York's electoral votes always go to the Democratic candidate, no matter who they are. And we think of ourselves as a progressive state. In a lot of ways, we really are. And also, there are large sections of this state where it's pretty socially acceptable and normal to think that LGBTQIA plus people are monstrous sexual predators who deserve to die. That's a thing people really believe and really say out loud pretty regularly. So yeah, I live in Kingston. It's a little kind of light blue shape surrounded by pink shapes. it's not something that we can really like stop thinking about, because there's like signs in people's lawns in my neighborhood, right? That say that people like me and my friends and my family are evil and don't deserve to be alive. So when you're like supporting, supervising someone, and this is happening around them, they might like those are things to like understand, and it can be like it can just be so hard to like know what to do with that when I go to work, right? Um, when I was doing the peer support work 8 months ago, like I would meet with a young trans person, and I would want to be able to like share my story and the stories of my friends, and be able to like talk about how, like, even though all this is happening, we are still this like incredible, beautiful set of communities that are doing like gorgeous, magical things, and we get to have these like beautiful lives, and we get this incredible experience of like real radical authenticity and radical freedom that comes with like being queer and trans. And um and also at the same time, like there are literal like gangs of armed right-wing white supremacists who want to murder us, who like are one town over and are like real open about how they want to kill us, and they're just waiting for permission from the government, you know? And like, what do you do with that? Like, how do you just put that down and go to work? Um, and then especially like if you have, like me, a history of being labeled as experiencing psychosis, like what do you do with that when it sounds like you're paranoid? We'll talk more about that in a bit. But just continuing, New York State, despite all those red places, is a sanctuary state, which means that that specifically that trans people are welcome to come to New York if they live in a place where where they're not safe. At least according to a decree by the government. That doesn't mean it's affordable or that there's jobs waiting for them, but um, and um, and yet, like, some of us have family in states where like we're not sure if it's safe to visit our family. Um, some of us have trans kids and are like painfully aware of states that are deciding that allowing a trans child to access healthcare constitutes child abuse. And um, like there's a lot of history of social work being weaponized against specific communities, and that feels like a piece of that, right? Okay, so these are all just things that like are on our minds. And they're also things that can change, that are changing, that are always changing. And like I don't want to like just sit on that bummer and just leave it as it is, right? Because it is also true that the whole reason for that reaction is because of how amazing and beautiful and vibrant our communities are, and how visible we are, increasingly visible. And, all of that stuff is coming from a pretty small group of people who are just afraid of freedom and afraid of not getting to be in control of everything. And so that's a good thing. The like this liberation work that we're part of, like it's happening. It's just being pushed back against. But we've literally always been here, and we always will be.
So what I'm going to say is, because we're almost at 3:20. I if it's okay, Elise, I'd like to just kind of go through the rest of them and quickly, so we can have some time for questions. Um, Queer trans people have often been diagnosed as psychotic, and that's been used, like with Marsha P. Johnson, to hospitalize them and to take away our freedoms. And it's okay to feel paranoid sometimes. And we also, it's again, access to medical care and access to, the providers that we need that will be available to us.
All right, so I want to just draw this connection between the Mad Pride, consumer, survivor, ex-patient movements, and queer and trans liberation, and sort of point out some places where treatment as usual, and even like recovery and ideas about recovery as like being able to be successful in this white supremacist capitalist cis heteropatriarchy. Sometimes that's like a really different thing than the liberation that we actually want, right? And it's a little bit, it can be hard to talk about that in a really, at least I think so. But there was a point when I realized that like when people were talking in treatment, when people were talking about recovery, what they were talking about was something that I didn't actually want, which was to be like, acceptable to like normal society. And in fact, my failure to be acceptable is maybe one of my favorite things about myself. And it's one of the most beautiful and important parts of both of those movements. And I think we just like, if you're not part of these communities and you're supervising someone who is, that might be a really like hard thing to understand, that maybe maybe I don't want to be in charge of things. Like maybe I don't want power at all. Maybe I want something that's different than power. Like maybe I don't want to be the CEO one day. Um, or maybe I do so that I have the power to change things. I don't know. Like I'm not saying we don't ever want that. It's like definitely give us promotions. But for me, like I don't want power over anybody, and I never have. Except when I've been really scared, long ago. And and that's just like such a different story than the story of psychiatry and social work and treatment as usual and recovery so that you can be successful and be part of a system that, let's be real, is essentially like built around oppression and exploitation of somebody. Like I don't want to be successful in capitalism. And sometimes I don't know what to do with that work, right? And it's cool when that can be brought into supervision and that understanding and that idea that like we're not just this vulnerable group. We are a group that is about something really important. We're about like real transformation. And the we that I'm talking about is mad people and peer specialists and queer and trans people. And it's a very big, very generous we, right? And so also just like remembering that like recovery might look like a lot of things for us. It can be really different. And for a lot of us, particularly queer and trans people, the heart of it is learning to be our real selves and unlearning the self-hate that we were like that was carefully cultivated in us. And that's like a different thing than getting our symptoms under control, right? It's a different goal. Okay. Thank you for listening.
So this is a summary of what we talked about today. These slides will be available on the PeerTAC website within, I think, 30 days is what Angelique told us. So could you go to the next slide, Elise? So ask us some questions. Yeah, there you go.
Hi.
Please turn on your camera when you ask a question. It's just hard to talk to a name. Oh, nobody? Everybody had a lot of comments in the chat. Okay, here's a question for all of you. how many of you, and you can use your little hand, how many of you identify as part of the LGBTQ community?
Oh, thank you, Sean. Yes. I love the enthusiasm.
So I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I once had an employment counselor who was trans and had coworkers who were very mean about it every time I was there and would intentionally misgender and dead name them. And one time I came in and somebody was asking for the counselor who had worked with them previously by one of their dead names. And the receptionist's response was, "I don't know who you're talking about." And my mother, who was there with me, said, "Oh, you mean insert counselor's name here." Would there have been a better way to handle that situation?
I guess in those situations, I would want you to speak with a manager or a supervisor. That would be the first thing I would ask to do. I just wouldn't, I mean, that's, I know it happens, but, I think we have to cut that off, all of us, by responding really quickly.
And I would just add to that was that in New York State?
Yes, it was.
Okay, yeah, so that's illegal discrimination. I put the New York Transgender Advocacy Group website on there that lists people's rights under agenda and also tells how to file a human rights complaint. Although obviously first you go to leadership or HR of the agency. But if they refuse to act, then that is a totally legitimate place to go to the government.
Thanks, Melanie. I appreciate the question. That was a really interesting question too.
It's
If I
also,
can,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Vic.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate the transparency, the honesty, the bravery of this afternoon's gathering. So thank you for that and for holding space for conversations that I don't think get held enough. I'm not sure where my question is, but I'm going to just put it here because I feel safe to do it. And thank you for all of you for making me feel safe to do this. In my agency, we recently hired a trans peer. And in the first 3 months of her employment, it became very obvious that there were some employment challenges, things that required corrective action and conversations to get her up to the standards of the work. Because in the probationary period, we want to make sure that we're addressing things before they reach the probationary period and they just get sorry, it didn't work out, but that we were also committed to getting them up to speed. And the peer unfortunately internalized, I think, a lot of the conversations around performance and began creating pockets of conversations in the office that these were really veiled under discriminatory feelings or maybe didn't have merit, that they were being singled out. And it was very difficult to rein in a bobcat. And it's not she that was the bobcat. It was the thing that got created about whether she was being treated fairly. Obviously, you don't talk about people's disciplinary issues in large places or really in any places. They're supposed to be private conversations. And I wonder if there is a better way to kind of wrangle or get ahead of creating a more discrete narrative, or maybe what would be the recommendation to address where people are starting to whisper, oh, they're trying to get her out of here because, right, all of the things where people may have bought into, including the employee herself, that this wasn't going to work out, was deliberate that it wasn't going to work out. Yeah, the question is somewhere in there. And maybe there's no question. I'm in the situation currently. I supervise the supervisor of the peer. And I can point out where I think I wish things had gone differently, where the director had made some different choices. At the same time, I recognize that the peer was looking for pockets of support for herself, navigating a new employment. And I think some of the conversations really ended up looking for allyship without all of the transparency that, hey, I am struggling at my new job, but really having a different narrative.
Some of it, I think, isn't, I think some of it needs to be escalated to HR. That's part of what they do. And I don't necessarily think every HR person is terrible. I mean, I think they do try to do the best they can. And I would start there. And you're really in a hard situation, Vicky. And I feel from, your concerns. But have you thought of being able to bringing, yourself and the peer and the supervisor together to try to have some conversations? Or, it maybe involve HR in a way, so that, it's going to be hard. That person doesn't feel supported. So,
Yeah, we've done that. We've sat together. I actually interviewed her first at a job fair and then decided which team I thought she would make the best fit on. And so I think in her eyes, one of the people that she felt connected to because I was the first person to meet her. And I think gave a very welcoming introduction to the agency. And then I think some of the dynamics on the team may have gotten sideways and I was not involved. And then giving direction to the director to have an approach with the team and then bringing them together and then escalating some of the memo-worthy performance issues to HR. And it seemed like soon there were these two different tracks of like the performance stuff and the behavior stuff. Because there were some very deliberate things too. And she would wait until the directors left at 5 p.m. and then approach colleagues saying, I think they're trying to get me out of here. Do you think I should quit? What do you think I should do? I'm not in the union yet. Do you think that I should? Is anybody?
Can I interrupt you for just a second? David had his hand up and he
Sure.
might have some thoughts. David?
Fortunately, it was about the previous situation, not this one, so I'll just sit here.
Okay, sorry.
I have a thought. Which is just one is that like that all that may be true, and like it's also true that that a lot of trans people do experience a lot of discrimination on a daily basis. That is very, very hard to prove almost all the time. And a lot of it is from people who don't believe that they're discriminating. And so, it's a complicated, sticky situation as you are well aware. And it sounds like I feel like one of the most important pieces is like really, really open, really direct communication. And it sounds like that's happening. So that's fantastic. And yeah, like, sometimes it's not the right job and like that's a thing that happens. And it's on the people who have the power to like really look hard and like really take the time and the energy to take apart like what's going on and consider like maybe there's a structural thing at work and like nobody is choosing to discriminate against this person, but maybe there's just something going on that's like subtle and structural that needs to change that has nothing to do with somebody being a bad person. And it's just, and maybe, like not every job is for every person. So yeah.
Good pieces of feedback. I appreciate that, Elise, very much. One of the pieces of feedback that I gave to the director is that not excluding this person from team discussions or team activities is not the same as including them. You know, I heard a lot of like, well, I didn't tell her not to come to the gathering, or I didn't say that she
Oh,
wasn't excited, or I didn't suggest that she was, but we didn't also say the team is meeting and we are and us all and there was
so
some
I mean, that is the director's issue. And I guarantee if you were to dive down deeply enough, I think you would find that that person has some level of transphobia. They're not comfortable with the peer that they're working with. They don't understand it. Um, you know, I'm sure the first thing they would say, of course I get it. I would never do those things. But what you're saying is by excluding and not including, um, your peer is getting a message that they're not part of a team.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great. It's great that you explain that to them, but I'm sorry, but that was a microaggression through and through. I mean, you not inviting them to the table.
Yeah.
oh no,
You
no,
know,
they weren't excluded from anything, and I think that was
but they
the
weren't invited to either.
right. Well,
Right.
it was the team meets at 1 o'clock and it's on everybody's calendar. And
But
Uh-huh.
maybe this
thought
person
that-
needed somebody to say, we really want you to come. Please join us. Please, you're part of the team. I mean,
Particularly if they're a newer member of your team as well.
right,
Yeah.
right. There wasn't a gathering where she was sitting one place and all 11 people were sitting someplace else. It was, I didn't realize, I didn't look at my calendar, and I think that's where the director was digging their heels in all of the performance things. Like it's on her calendar, like it's on everybody else's calendar. You know, she didn't show up. She's not looking at her calendar, and she's, oh, I thought I was starting in the field that day and not in the office. And so it's really hard to pick out like where is it to put
This feels like it's on the director. It just doesn't feel like, and I think Sean just said that, your director is the problem. I don't know that it's the peer.
Yeah, I think just as a peer specialist trainer, a thing that comes up sometimes also is that there is this whole network of assumptions about what everybody knows, in like particularly in the field of mental health, and sometimes like we just assume that everybody knows, and actually like if you didn't go to social work school and you haven't worked in the field for the last few years, like it might actually, like, things that seem obvious might not be. I want to make sure we have time to hear from David though.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
There we go. So, bearing in mind that this is being recorded, if somebody has transitioned in your agency or your program or whatever, and they have chosen to select an appropriate name to their expression, and do you know what the rights or the policy are for the state that would dictate what we would have to follow? Because there's, things happen and I have to speak up for certain things, and it's just like I don't have the backing or I guess I don't have the resources, the information to do so. Yeah, I got the I got the thing, but is there a specific thing?
You mean like to like let your employer, for like to let an employer know that you're using a new name, or
So the person chose a new name.
uh,
They were told that they cannot have that new name on their ID or on their logins because it wasn't their legal name.
Okay, yeah, that's illegal discrimination. So the next step, if it hasn't already happened, would be to go to the HR department and explain that situation. And the person may need to like communicate about gender because a lot of HR people don't actually know about the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. And if HR does not back them and make that happen, then the phone number that's on that website is how you file a human rights complaint.
Okay, but can you earmark or highlight or email me the specific regulation that's being infringed upon?
Sure. Yeah, it's the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for bringing that up.
Anyone want to add anything, ask a question? I know we've gone over a little bit of time, and obviously the Zoom police haven't cut us off. But I guess
Well, I just want to add to, I've been saying this in our agency forever, and I wasn't even aware that it was necessarily part of the Non-Discrimination Act. I'm glad that you brought that up, Elise, because I mean, I feel like I had a team member of ours that started to identify with pronouns they, them, their, and wanted to be referred to as Cece. And I immediately tried to get their name changed on all those things at the time. And I was told too that it couldn't happen. And I said to them, I said, well, I don't get it because my name is actually Mark Sean Brennan. But on my email, I'm allowed to have Sean, which is my middle name, not my first name. And on my paycheck, even my paycheck comes to me as Sean Brennan, not Mark Sean Brennan. So I didn't understand. I was told that something had just slipped. Somewhere I had slipped through a crack or something. And when I used myself as the example of how easy it is just to give me the email name that I want. And so yeah, so I'm really, really glad that you have brought this up as a opportunity to go to HR and have a further discussion. I also sit on our Pride committee at my agency, and we've tried to do this as we have more trans team members join our agency. Really wanted to make this in the beginning one of our big pushes as an inter agency committee, right, which is meant to strengthen LGBTQI plus rights and protections within our agency, and was shot down again when we tried to bring it up and was told it couldn't happen. So I would really appreciate it if you would email me that as well, so that I can bring it up at our next Pride committee meeting.
Okay. All right. So my email address is in the chat. So please write to me and I'll respond because I don't have everybody's access to everybody's email addresses. Let me put the correct one. But yeah, I also dropped the Transgender Law Center Get Help form. They've been known to just like send a scary attorney letter, which can sometimes be the thing that works. Just like you're in violation of this law, stop. Sometimes that's all it takes. Okay, there you go. So yeah, if you want me to send you these things in an email, write to me.
Guess as we're finishing up, I want to thank people for joining us today and participating. This is a big, big subject that has lots of tentacles, and it moves quickly and things change. So this may be what we have now, and in 6 months or a year, things may change. So I say, keep being educated and keep reading what's available.
Yeah. I actually have a document that explains how to do a legal name change for trans folks in upstate New York, outside of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Email me if you want me to send it to you. And
Awesome.
actually, I can direct you to the place for New York City also. Yeah, I gotta say, like, I talk about this stuff in the mental health space like pretty regularly. I don't often get to be in a room where like other people are like fierce and standing up for our communities, and this felt so good, and I am feeling full of love and hope. So thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you. This made me so happy. Thank you to Elise and Beth, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you to the Alliance, to OMH, to PeerTAC. Just a reminder that the recording and the slides will be on the PeerTAC site soon. And if you have any questions about CE credits, feel free to reach out to any members of the PeerTAC team. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. We really appreciate your being here. Thank you, Elise. You're a rock star.
Thank you, Beth, you too.
Thank you, actually. Appreciate all your help. Thanks, Steve. I'll see you, I think, beginning of April.
Thank you.
Look
This
forward
was
to
great.
it.
Thanks.
Elise,
All right.
great job. That was a very excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Yay.
All right, I have to go walk the dog, everyone.